You know what's slower than a Canadian apologizing their way through a crowded Tim Hortons? Federal project approvals in this country. And Alberta Premier Danielle Smith just looked at Ottawa's timeline and basically said, yeah, that's not going to work for us. Welcome to another episode of Alberta versus Ottawa, where the stakes are high, the oil is heavy, and the patience is absolutely non-existent. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, your daily dose of Canadian political drama served up faster than Smith wants those project approvals. And speaking of approvals, we've got a story today that's got everything. International intrigue, oil politics, a dash of Trump chaos, and Danielle Smith writing letters to the Prime Minister like she's a concerned parent emailing their kid's teacher about homework deadlines. Except instead of homework, we're talking billions of dollars in energy projects, and instead of gold stars, we're talking about keeping Alberta's economy competitive. No pressure, right? So here's the situation, and buckle up because this one's got more layers than your winter coat in a Winnipeg February. Danielle Smith just fired off a letter to Prime Minister Mark Carney, and she's not asking politely anymore. She wants major project approvals cut from 2 years down to 6 months. That's not asking for a trim, that's asking for a full-on buzz cut. She wants the federal government to basically put their approval process on rocket fuel and get things moving at warp speed. Now, before you think this is just Smith being impatient because, well, she's Danielle Smith and patience isn't exactly her trademark quality, there's actually some serious geopolitical chess happening here. And the chess pieces include Venezuela, the United States, oil markets, and good old-fashioned Canadian economic anxiety. It's like Game of Thrones, but instead of dragons, we've got drilling rigs, and instead of the Iron Throne, everyone's fighting over refinery capacity. Let me paint you the picture of what's got Smith's attention, because this is where it gets wild. You might have caught the news that the United States basically swooped into Venezuela and captured President Nicolas Maduro. Yeah, that happened. The US just casually executed what amounts to a geopolitical hostage situation with a country's leader. And if you're thinking, wait, what does that have to do with Alberta oil? Oh buddy, do I have a story for you. Venezuela sits on some of the largest oil reserves on the planet. We're talking massive amounts of heavy crude oil. The same kind of heavy crude that Alberta produces. The same kind that gets shipped to US refineries that are specifically designed to process heavy oil. Now, for years, Venezuela's oil production has been hampered by sanctions, mismanagement, and general political chaos. But now, with Maduro out of the picture and Trump announcing plans to ramp up oil production in Venezuela with American investment, suddenly Alberta's got competition. And not just any competition, closer, potentially cheaper competition. Think of it like this. You're running a pizza shop, and you've had a pretty sweet deal with the restaurant down the street that only serves burgers. But suddenly, your burger friend decides to start making pizzas too, and they're right next door to your biggest customer. That's basically what's happening here, except instead of pizzas, it's barrels of heavy crude, and instead of a neighborhood rivalry, we're talking about continental energy security and billions of dollars. Smith looked at this situation and basically had an economic panic attack, which, to be fair, is pretty justified. If Venezuelan oil starts flooding into US refineries at increased volumes, that's oil that isn't coming from Alberta. That's jobs in Alberta's energy sector. That's royalty revenue for the provincial government. That's the entire economic engine that keeps Alberta running. So when Smith says she wants faster project approvals, she's not just being demanding for the sake of it. She's watching the landscape shift in real time and realizing that Canada's current pace might not cut it anymore. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because Ottawa isn't just sitting around doing nothing. Prime Minister Mark Carney actually established a major projects office last year specifically designed to speed up these approvals. The current target is 2 years for regulatory reviews, which, compared to what it used to be, is actually progress. It's like going from dial-up internet to high speed. Sure, it's better, but Smith is basically saying we need fiber optic or we're going to get left behind. And you can kind of see both sides here, which makes this deliciously complicated. From Ottawa's perspective, you can't just rubber stamp major projects without doing proper environmental assessments, indigenous consultations, and regulatory oversight. These projects are huge. We're talking pipelines, refineries, massive infrastructure that impacts communities, ecosystems, and has long-term consequences. Rushing through approvals might speed things up, but it could also create legal challenges, environmental disasters, or community conflicts that end up costing way more time and money in the long run. But from Smith's perspective, and really from Alberta's economic perspective, time is literally money. Every month that a project sits in regulatory limbo is money not being invested, jobs not being created, and competitive advantage slipping away. When your competition is ramping up production with the backing of the United States government, you can't afford to be running a three-legged race while everyone else is sprinting. The letter Smith sent to Carney is basically her version of a strongly worded email, except it's public, it's political, and it's designed to put pressure on Ottawa to move faster. She's not just asking behind closed doors. She's posting this on social media, making sure everyone sees it, making sure Albertans know she's fighting for them, and making sure Carney knows this isn't going away quietly. What's fascinating is how this ties into the larger Alberta-Ottawa dynamic that's basically been the soundtrack of Canadian politics for decades. Alberta feels like the federal government doesn't understand or prioritize the energy sector. Ottawa feels like Alberta doesn't appreciate environmental concerns or the complexity of national policy. It's the same song, different verse, and this Venezuelan situation just turned up the volume. And let's talk about Trump for a second, because of course he's involved in this somehow. The man's plan to boost Venezuelan oil production isn't just about helping Venezuela. It's about American energy dominance, keeping oil prices favorable for American consumers, and probably a dozen other strategic calculations. But the consequence for Canada is that our biggest customer is actively working to develop an alternative supplier. That's like your best friend suddenly becoming besties with someone else. It stings, and it changes the dynamic. Smith is essentially arguing that Canada needs to be more competitive, more nimble, and frankly, more aggressive about getting projects approved and built. She's looking at what the US is doing with Venezuela and thinking if they can move that fast on international energy deals, why can't we move faster on our own domestic projects? It's a fair question wrapped in a lot of political urgency and economic anxiety. The 6-month timeline Smith is proposing is ambitious. Some would say wildly ambitious. Some would say unrealistic. Going from 2 years to 6 months is basically asking the federal government to do a complete overhaul of how they handle major project reviews. That's not a small ask. That's restructuring entire regulatory frameworks, potentially changing legislation, and fundamentally rethinking how environmental and social impacts are assessed. But here's the thing about politics. Sometimes you ask for the moon knowing you'll settle for a satellite. Smith might be demanding 6 months knowing that even if she gets Ottawa to come down to a year, that's still a win. It's negotiation 101. Start high, negotiate down, but make sure you're moving the conversation in your direction. And by going public with this letter, Smith is making sure that when Albertans see 2-year approval timelines, they're now thinking but our Premier asked for 6 months, so why is it taking so long? The elephant in the room, or maybe the oil derrick in the room, is that this entire conversation is happening against the backdrop of global energy transitions. The world is supposedly moving away from fossil fuels. Renewable energy is growing. Climate commitments are being made. And yet here we are, talking about speeding up approvals for oil projects because Venezuela's ramping up production. It's the contradiction at the heart of modern energy policy. Everyone says they want to transition, but nobody wants to be the one left holding the economic bag when oil is still a massive global commodity. What Smith is really saying underneath all this is that Canada can't afford to be slow while the rest of the world plays fast. If the US is moving on Venezuela, if other countries are developing their resources quickly, and if global oil markets are shifting, then Canada's regulatory processes need to match the speed of the global economy. Otherwise, we're not being environmentally responsible, we're just being economically inefficient while someone else produces the oil the world still demands. The response from Ottawa is going to be crucial here. Carney can double down on the 2-year timeline, defend the importance of thorough reviews, and basically tell Smith that quality takes time. Or he could signal some flexibility, maybe explore ways to streamline certain aspects, find efficiencies, and meet Alberta somewhere in the middle. How he responds will say a lot about federal-provincial dynamics, about how seriously Ottawa takes Alberta's economic concerns, and about whether there's any room for compromise in what's becoming an increasingly tense relationship. And let's be real, this isn't just about project approvals. This is about respect, recognition, and whether Alberta feels heard by the federal government. Every time Smith writes these letters, every time she makes these public demands, she's also speaking directly to her base. She's showing Albertans that she's fighting for them, that she's not backing down to Ottawa, and that she understands the economic stakes. It's politics and policy wrapped together in a nice Alberta-sized package. The Venezuelan wildcard makes this whole situation even more unpredictable. If Trump's plans for Venezuelan oil production actually materialize quickly, if that oil starts competing with Canadian heavy crude in American refineries, then Smith's urgency becomes even more justified. But if it's slower than expected, if there are complications, if the geopolitical situation shifts again, then maybe the 2-year timeline looks more reasonable. The problem is nobody knows for sure, and in that uncertainty, Smith is choosing to push for speed rather than wait and see. This is Canadian Insights, where we break down the politics behind the pipelines and the drama behind the drilling. If this video got your gears turning, hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already part of the crew because we're pumping out content daily, and smash that notification bell so you catch every update. Let me know in the comments what you think. Is Smith right to push for 6-month approvals, or is 2 years actually reasonable for major projects? Are you team move fast or team do it right? Drop your thoughts below. And if you stuck around this long, you're clearly invested in Canadian energy politics, which makes you either very informed or slightly masochistic, possibly both. Either way, I appreciate you. Catch you in the next one, where we'll probably have another Alberta-Ottawa showdown because let's be honest, that's just how we roll. Peace.